Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar, the first of 2021. Today I have the pleasure to introduce Rudy, a colleague of mine from EPCC, that will talk about patterns for research software management using GitHub. So the floor is yours, Rudy.
Thank you very much, Juan, and yeah, I'm glad to be kicking off this webinar series for 2021. Yep, so this is going to be covering GitHub and how we can use it to kind of effectively manage our software projects. Let me just go through some standard slides here. Some of our partners. Okay, so why are we talking about this? So I did a bit of a survey beforehand. I kind of wrote down all the different tools I could think of that I've seen people using or I use myself in order to manage software really and manage manage software projects. So it's not just kind of Git. There's also separate issue trackers. There's Kanban, Trello boards, Slack, of course. There's a multitude of different things. And the reason that we use that is because there's a significant amount of effort required to effectively manage a software project beyond just ensuring code gets written. Because at the end of the day, we all have to either deliver a product for a customer or generate results for a paper. But there's actually a lot of machinery in code organization, communication within your project team and with external collaborators, and there's a lot of process involved. So we rely on these tools to sort of ease that process. Even if this was all just about code, we write code. We write code, and then it's actually read much more than it's written. So there's actually a lot of careful effort involved in ensuring that good quality code gets written and that it's kind of future-proofed for changes. And even if you're even if you're running a sort of solo project on your own, oops, let me just see if I can get my pointer here. Even if you're running a sort of solo project on your own, or you're managing a dissertation or something else, you still need to potentially manage communication with external people who might want to help out. So yeah, all of this requires machinery, and we need some extra tools to do that. So that's a why. The next point is why GitHub specifically. Well, it's sort of just become the de facto standard over the last, I don't know, 10 years or so. It provides the majority of the types of tools that we listed previously. Mostly free to use. It's very easy. It's a very simple interface. And the main advantage of using GitHub or any single service is that you benefit from the cohesion between all the different tools. You only have to learn one ecosystem effectively, and same goes for your project team and any of your users. They only have to learn one thing. It's got unlimited free, public, and now private repositories, although that wasn't always the case. There's also some educational packages if you want some of the more advanced features for students and teachers. Another key thing with why GitHub is specifically the one that we're recommending here is that it's now got the free continuous testing built in with GitHub Actions. So I'll go through why we want that and why we use those, and it's quite straightforward to get set up. So that's another aspect. So the question I'll probably get straight away is, why not GitLab or something else? GitLab specifically, it's a bit more cluttered, and it's used much less. It operates at a much different scale than GitHub does. So your community is automatically a bit smaller. I'm not saying to not use GitLab at all, because obviously, if you GitLab something you can run locally at your institution. So if you want to manage private repositories, then it can be another option. But for code or projects that you're happy to be open source, which is great, GitHub is definitely the way to go. Okay. So specifically, what are we going to be covering today? So there's two main, or I guess two and a bit main sections. The first one is how to create a high-quality, accessible repository. We'll cover what that means and all different things that you should include in your repository in order for people to use it easily. That'll be, hopefully there won't be too much, groundbreaking things for you to discover there, but it's good to cover the basics because, these sorts of things are things that the open source community generally does quite well, but I've seen research projects generally don't do this as often. And I'm sure everyone's going to say, "Well, my project is perfect and great," in which case you can all kind of kick back and relax a bit. The second thing we're going to cover, which is kind of going to be the slightly larger section, is the how to manage collaboration. So yeah, you need to ensure that your team can interact with your project or repository, without too much friction, and that your users, whether it be completely external people or some collaborators, can have the best experience when they're interacting with your project. Yeah, I'll kind of use project and repository kind of interchangeably. Can sort of take it to mean the same thing here. So yeah, in the second section we're going to be covering dealing with issues, what pull requests are, CI, which I've mentioned is continuous integration, code reviews. We'll also cover some tools to kind of help manage code, so linters and formatters, and some of the other tools that GitHub provides, such as project boards and wikis. Okay, so those are the first two main sections we'll be covering. They'll also cover, there's some other sort of miscellaneous features that don't really fall into a specific category, but we'll talk about them as well at the end. So that includes some tools to deal with your dependencies if you have any on your project, and some graphical tools that might help you. If you're not a developer, then you can still use GitHub if you're just sort of managing a project. And then we'll have some discussions throughout. What I won't be covering is version control and Git itself. If you're not using any version control in your project, then what you're doing, it's 2020. There's literally no excuse not to be using it. Git is the most widely used today, and there's years and years worth of resources you could spend years worth going through all the resources. Specifically, I'd recommend the software carpentry tutorials, and in fact a previous Archer virtual webinar that Arno gave, I think a few years ago now. So if you're completely unfamiliar with Git, then those would be good starting points. For the purposes of this webinar, a basic understanding of what Git is and what Git branches are is probably sufficient. We won't be going into the theory too much. And yeah, I've already mentioned before, but there's nowadays there's sort of visual tools that you can actually use to interact with Git, so you don't have to be forced to use the command line if you're not comfortable. If you're already familiar with GitHub and you use it, then that's great. We'll probably cover some. Well, I'm going to cover some best practices and perhaps some lesser known features. Excuse me. Yep. So if you kind of spot anything that I've missed, or if you think you want to add something, then that's great. I want this to be a sort of discussion session if possible, so I'll try and pause and keep an eye on the chat. And you can use the raise your hand feature to interact. Standard disclaimer: there's going to be some opinionated content here because it's just the way it is. But I kind of use GitHub on a daily basis for both work and personal projects. So I have some expertise, I guess, although I'm happy to be corrected on any points. Okay. Anything else to mention before I start? I'm just reading the chat. Yes, thank you to Claire for linking the version control video there. Right. Okay. So how do we build our projects to be the best that they can be, really? So the main goals are to ensure your project is easy to use, basically. So yeah, again, project here means repository. So you want to make sure your repository is easy to find, use, and learn. You want to provide your users an easy, a straightforward way of interacting with it and finding the most relevant content, and providing feedback if needed, whether this be in bug reports or as contributions, as code contributions. And you also want to make sure that your team, if you have one, who are really the primary users of your repository, don't have any issues adding their code and making changes, and it's quite low friction. So those are two kind of goals to keep in mind in this section. So specifically, what does a high quality accessible repository look like, and what does it contain? Let's kind of do a proof by a counter example here. So low quality and inaccessible could mean that there's no landing page, or landing page here means the Readme files that GitHub automatically looks for and displays. What's probably not great though is if you have a Readme and it's in a complete just text, blank text or plain text format. We'll see how you can use sort of Markdown, which is like a kind of markup language to to include more detailed content, and this gets sort of converted into a nice output in HTML. So another poor example would be no visible documentation. Full stop. If you don't have any documentation, then your users are going to have trouble running your code, or your project team might not know how to interact with any existing code. This is particularly important if you're trying to bring a new member onto your project team, and there's that really highlights when you don't have enough documentation, is when you're trying to onboard somebody. Sorry, I used the word onboard, which I know is an Americanism that some people don't like. So documentation is fine, but having documentation in the right format is also key. So I saw a project recently where they had loads of documentation. It was great, but it was all in a single Word document. So that causes some issues, as we'll see. It's not particularly useful. And some other issues there were to do with code layout and contacting, and we'll kind of go through each of these individually. And yes, all of the above are real examples that I've seen recently. So let's see how we can improve that. So high quality means basically anything other than the above, but specifically we want to do things like structuring our code properly, having a detailed README with nicely formatted Markdown, having not forcing our users to click through many different links to find the right content. I know there's some computer interaction theory which says nothing should be more than 3 clicks away, something like that. So that's a good metric to keep in mind. The issue tracker should be free for people to use, and not locked away. And ideally, providing templates helps to reduce any issues when issues are being raised. But as we'll see. Something else that might be useful is to have guidelines for contributors. So if someone discovers your project and they want to add something, it's a good idea to document how they can add something, so the actual process involved. And then we'll discuss some other bits, including kind of managing releases as well. Okay, so first sort of topic is how to lay out your source code. If you do this perfectly already, then great. Some of the tips may be useful to you though. So it's a good idea to pick a standard, clear directory layout. Some languages, so I think like Rust or something, or prescribe certain layouts, but there's still a lot of files in your project that probably aren't code, so your documentations and your data. There's an example here I've pasted, which is just one of my project repos, where you can see everything's organized into data, docs, libraries, utilities, that sort of thing. So it's a good idea just to decide on how you're going to do that, and arrange things so that people don't have to go searching around everywhere. You can look at some big popular projects for some examples in that. Some tips for GitHub specifically. If you're looking at the code in the UI, you can press T and then type in something that vaguely resembles the file you're looking for, and the UI should then show you, take you straight to that file. This is very useful in larger projects specifically. You can also sort of hide, in quotes, any files that the average user doesn't really need to care about. So these are often configuration files for running tests and stuff, and sort of GitHub meta information. So it's just kind of it doesn't really do anything. It's just kind of a useful indication that you can probably ignore that file. Okay. So yeah, let's discuss the README specifically. So this is really the main sort of focal point of your repository. When someone lands in your repository, GitHub will automatically sort of search for this file and render it and display it as a sort of cover page, I guess. Also, for any subdirectories, if any subdirectories have a README, then the README will also be rendered there. So the kind of thing you want to include here are a top level summary, some general information, links to all the relevant content. This is where you link to your documentation if that's somewhere externally, or some testing information. You get bonus points if you include some usage examples or some frequently asked questions. Having a frequently asked questions section is great because that might prevent loads of issues being reported repeatedly that you would have to spend time reviewing, basically. So there's a lot of things that you can add here to really save yourself some time later on. Something else that some projects have are the guidelines for contributions. So I think I mentioned that before, but this can either be a separate file on its own, or you can just include it in the README. So I mentioned Markdown, and I'll kind of give a quick overview of what this is. Excuse me. So Markdown is it's a plain text format, really. So you can type it in a terminal or in a web browser or a notepad, pretty much anywhere. And it gets rendered to HTML by GitHub, basically. So you can write plain text and get nice, nicely formatted output. It contains all the usual stuff you'd expect from a text format. So you can do links, images, etc. And that's all part of the language. What's great about it is that if you look at it in its sort of plain format, it's still easy to read the content, even if it includes things like links, which are really only links are just bits of text until you render it. So the plain text format is just as readable as the rendered format. The main reason I recommend Markdown over, I used a bad example of Word document previously, is that it's really difficult to search through a Word document if it's just uploaded to a repo. So you can search through plain text documents very easily. And yeah, it's more forgiving than LaTeX, as an example. Some issues with Markdown. So there's several different flavors. So I think if you use R, there's R Markdown, and some of the more advanced features, rendering features, only work on certain flavors. But my recommendation is if you stick to GitHub, then it's probably the safest option. There's some more tips there. So you can compile your Markdown to a PDF if you want to share it with people who aren't using GitHub. A slightly more advanced form, it's a different format, but it's used for some more advanced things, is restructured text. It's similar to Markdown, except it's kind of extensible. So you can write external bits of code that are used to then render your document. So that's another alternative that you could consider. And here's an example of Markdown. The emojis may be a bit too much, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. So yeah, on the left is kind of the plain text, and you can see it's pretty much the same thing as on the right, except the right-hand side is rendered nicely. Okay, so I mentioned the issue tracker before. This is one of the sort of main, I guess it can be the main contact point for your project. And through the issue tracker, you will receive bug reports, feature requests, and question and answers potentially, or questions, and then you provide the answers. So one of the main problems that I see is that, or one of the main problems that happens generally is that users may report a bug, but they don't provide any actual useful information for you to help solve their problem. So the solution to this, and I think it's probably one of my key points for today, is you can actually build a template for issues, so that as soon as somebody clicks create a new issue, they're presented with this template that they have to fill out. And the act of doing this actually forces whoever's writing the bug reports to hopefully put a bit more thought into what they're saying and provide all the information up front that you need. So this is something that GitHub supports very easily. I think you can just upload a Markdown file into a special place and GitHub will use that. Although I believe there's actually a UI now maybe you can use to build it, or they at least have some examples that you can pick from. Another thing that I'd recommend is, unless you're trying to debug an issue in a user interface, screenshots aren't particularly useful because you can't search through screenshots. The great thing about the issue tracker is it kind of provides a history of all the different things that have happened in your project, and so it's useful to be able to search through. And information contained in screenshots isn't usually very searchable, so I'd recommend avoiding that unless needed. There's some there could be some people who feel that issues is quite a negative thing, and some projects really like to keep their total issue count really low. So I think to solve this, GitHub is soon to introduce discussions, which is a separate thing, meant to be more like a forum, so more a place for question and answers. And that way your issue tracker could really just be for issues or tasks, as we'll see. Okay. So you mentioned documentation, so yeah, write some is the big point here. But there's many different ways you can write documentation, and many different, lots of different things you can include. The most basic you can do is to have your documentation in a Markdown file and just include that alongside your code in your repo. For larger things or more complex collections of documentation, you can use the wiki that's built into GitHub, and you can link to that from your README, of course. Slightly more advanced things, so you can actually create entire static websites of documentation purely from a single repository, and then this can be hosted either by GitHub or by some external service. So GitHub Pages lets you do this quite easily. So you can clone a template and then fill it out for your particular project, and then GitHub Pages will then publish this to a URL, which is github.io. And this is quite beneficial if you want to kind of really write some documentation that's more than just a text file, essentially, and you want to include like more images or links, that sort of thing. And this is sort of known as continuous documentation, where every time there's a change made, your docs are built and tested. Yes, you can write tests for documentation, so you can test if you include a code snippet in your documentation. You can write a test to make sure that that's still valid. So yeah, if you want an example of what this looks like, you can visit the service.readthedocs.io, and this shows an entire website that's built from a GitHub repo and then published. Okay, so this sort of versioning and releasing is kind of mostly if you're writing a library maybe, or an application that you're looking to you're providing to other people to use. But if so, what's key is to pick some sort of versioning scheme that tells users what they can expect when things change, really. So, for example, semver, which is semantic versioning, is probably the most common versioning scheme, and this is where you have a major, minor, and patch version. And then this basically indicates to users that if the last number in the version changes, then this is a kind of just a patch, and they're free to upgrade without any worries. A minor version usually includes a new feature, but without any anything that's going to break any existing installations. And then the major number at the top is the one that you change when you want to indicate that you've made some breaking changes in your project. And the thing that is really complemented by this is to have a changelog. So this is just a file that really lists all the things that are, not at each individual commit, because that's what the Git log is for, but it summarizes usually kind of a list of pull requests that have been made that add or change or fix some aspect of your project. So keeping a changelog is quite essential. I recommend. And yeah, there's keepachangelog.com gives a good template for what this could look like. If you want to do a bit more, you can also use Git releases or GitHub releases. So this is where you tag your project at a specific point in time, and you say, this is version 1 or whatever, and you can actually then pre-compile, distributable copies of your file, whether this be, a library or some application. Yeah, one tip for this is I wouldn't recommend. I try and avoid wherever possible, assuming that your users have root access to their systems. So it could be that they're working on a HPC system where they only have user level access. So if you can avoid that, then that's good to have. And yeah, so here's an example of what a changelog looks like. So this is from Slack. So it has a list of bugs fixed here and the date. And this is what a sort of release looks like. So this is version 2.93 of this particular project. Here are a list of fixes, and here are the source code and the compiled applications. Hello, yeah. Okay, so the thing, licenses are a thing that it often gets overlooked, but which are actually quite vital to have in your project. If you don't add a license, then you're not telling external people how they can safely use your work or modify it. And some potential users may actually be turned away by the fact that you don't have a license, because they may be required to only use projects that use a specific license. So obviously, I'm not a lawyer. You should consult your organization or what have you to determine what you're allowed to share and if you can share it. But GitHub is quite good at this, because it suggests licenses for you, and it can even include it in your project, and it displays it quite nicely and quite prominently. So that's another benefit. And yeah, you can use this choose a license website to help you decide on that. Okay, so that's the end of the first section. I'll pause and just look at the chat to see if there's any questions. If there's anything you think I've missed or want to add yourself, then please get in touch. Okay, let's move on to the second section then. Okay, so this is kind of the, I think I got a, so from Evgeny says, is there any reasons for a project to be strongly opposed to versioning, releases, and tags? It kind of depends on, it's a bit dependent on what your project is. I mean, if the project is just mainly documentation, for example, so for example that Cirrus documentation, then it might not make sense to kind of version that. But in most cases, it's definitely useful, because it clearly states that an end user, if they know the version that they're on, they can clearly see the difference between that version and the latest or the next version or the next upcoming version. I wouldn't recommend releases for everything, but at a minimum, I would recommend keeping a changelog, even if you don't want to do specific versioning. A changelog is just so useful, because you don't have to go diving through Git histories, and nobody wants to do that. So Dave says, do you suggest adding licenses? e.g. libraries used in your code. Yes. So this is something to keep in mind. Nowadays, when you're writing software, you rely on you're relying on many people who have come before you who have written great software. So you need to be mindful of not just using software without considering its own license when using it in your code. Depending on the license that one of your dependencies have, you might have to follow a same license, or you might at least have to include it in your project. Yeah, I'm not really an authority on this, but there's plenty of resources out there to learn about this. I think that website I mentioned, which was Choose a License, I think this has a lot of information which is really useful. But yeah, so for some licenses you might have to include it in your project. Okay. Right, so on to the kind of exciting stuff, I guess, in my mind, which is how to actually manage collaboration across your project and interaction. So the kind of goal of this section is to learn how to effectively use GitHub's tools to kind of reduce the effort required to do this and to do it effectively, and to help both your team and anyone else who comes along to kind of build on your project with little friction. Excuse me. Okay, so we spoke about issues before, but it's worth kind of expanding on this a bit. So yeah, issues are kind of the main contact point, but they can be a bit more than that. So you can also use issues to create tasks for your team to complete. And this is quite useful because you can actually assign issues to specific people. And you can categorize them in labels and all that good stuff. So for actually managing a project, using issues and pull requests and project boards, as we'll see, is it all works. They all work together, and it's all quite cohesive. One of the things that I think is extremely useful is that you can actually tag issues in commit messages and pull requests, and this will kind of show up in the issue log. So for example here, I added a commit that referenced this issue, and you can find that quite easily, and you can actually automatically close issues by you can tag a pull request, and this will then close the issue when the pull request is merged. So I find that extremely useful, and it's it's just nice and cohesive. So this is I'm probably going to be a bit controversial. Well, maybe not controversial, but this is a sort of thing that everybody has a slightly different opinion on, which is how do people actually contribute code to your project or improvements? And the particular controversial bit is the sort of branching model of Git. So there's a few different ways that you can interact with a project, or you can organize your own project, I should say. What I'd recommend is that there's a single main branch which all your changes are merged into. So, for example, if you were to add a new feature to, I don't know, support a new data format in your app, then in your code, I should say, you would create a new branch for that. You would kind of go away and work on that, and then when that's ready, you would request that this is merged back into the main branch via a pull request. Pull request is purely a GitHub term. It doesn't really exist in Git itself because Git just does direct merges. And I think if you use GitLab, it's called a merge request. So that's for people who are allowed to actually interact directly with your main repository. So that would be yourself and your project team. For external contributions, the workflows that they would what's called fork your project. So that would take a copy. They would take a copy of that under their own account. They would then work on their changes properly on a branch, and then this would be merged back into the main repository again through a pull request. So yeah, that's one example. It's kind of probably the most simple one, and I think GitHub kind of steers you towards that by default. There's many different things. Many different workflows possible depending on your scale and what you're doing. So something to discuss with your team. And yeah, I'd also recommend document documenting how your contributions can be done, because you want to make it as easy as possible for people to work on your project. Yep, some tips there. So you can actually do commits directly into the GitHub user interface. So if you just want to quickly fix up a bit of documentation, you don't even need to open the command line, which is great. Excuse me. And this will, when you do this commit, it will automatically open automatically open a pull request. So really, there's minimal effort involved. Another thing that I quite like for certain projects is you can configure rules so that switch block directs commits to a certain branch and force the kind of review process to happen. So for small scale stuff, it's probably you probably don't need to do this, but if you're writing code for something that's going into a service, for example, then this might be a good idea to help ensure that everything gets reviewed before it's merged. So a bit more on pull requests in a moment, but first some theory. Oh, 1 second. Okay, so yeah, I've just got a comment there from Mark R from Leeds. When a branch has been merged, does it have to be deleted? Could it persist to fix bugs? Yep, absolutely. So you can leave branches around if you like. GitHub will give you an option to automatically delete it if you like, but you don't have to. For example, if you're working on a feature and you have a sort of first working version of it, then you can merge that back into the main branch and continue working on the next version of a particular feature on that same branch. So no, you don't have to delete it. Hope that answers your question. And yeah, here's just a screenshot of the interface for committing directly into GitHub. So it's quite easy to do. Tests. Yeah, write some. I hopefully shouldn't have to discuss why having tests in your code is vital or are vital. But some extra things you can do are to document how the tests can be run, and so that users can verify themselves when they're either using your project or wanting to make a change, that they can run your tests and make sure they still pass. This is kind of a precursor to the next bit, but I just wanted to point out that we will assume that you already have tests in your project before we move on. Okay, so some tools that can help you ensure better code quality also help. So there's kind of two flavors. There's linters and then there's formatters. So linters are tools that can scan code either just as they just read in the file, or they might actually run it, so compile and run, and they will report on any common language mistakes, and I mean programming language mistakes or warnings or that sort of thing. And there's each of these things has a list of things that are common mistakes. So for Python, for example, there's MyPy, Flake8, and Pylint are the three big ones. I really recommend using some sort of linting in your code. Computers do what we tell them to at the end of the day, and we're the ones that create the bugs. So why not get the computer to help discover these bugs? Obviously, they're not going to discover everything, but they're really good for a quick sort of surface level discovery of anything that you might have missed. And we'll see in a minute, but you can actually hook up your linters to run as part of the pull request process. So any contributions you get will automatically be validated as well. The second flavor are the formatters, which kind of help to make sure your code looks nice. And this is probably one of the more controversial topics generally, because everybody has their own preferred style. But it's important, I guess, to pick one that works for your team and everybody's happy with. Yeah, this is one of the things that's kind of, people usually think, oh, it's kind of an extra, but actually, sometimes when you're reviewing pull request, you'll see something and you'll go, oh, I don't quite like that. So if you have a tool to automatically, make sure your code's in a specific format, then that reduces the sort of overhead in the review process. Some drawbacks, so don't have too many, because that will actually increase the friction for contributions, and put people off adding to your project. But yeah. Yes, and I mentioned a few tips there, but we'll see in a second how they work. I'd recommend this tool called Precommit, which kind of can gather all your, if you have more than one linter and a few formatters or whatever, then you can actually use Precommit and it will kind of install them and manage them centrally, so you don't really need to worry about it. And this will actually ensure that your team runs your formatters and linters before they even commit. So if Precommit runs a tool and the tool says no, the commit will actually be rejected. So that may be a bit over the top for your needs, but I find it kind of useful. Yeah, and here's some examples. So there's some, actually, I apologize, it's a bit too small to read, but this is a list of codes from Flake8, I think, which kind of tell you about different errors you can make. And here's an example of some reformatting tools as well. But yeah, there's hundreds to choose from for each language, so you can play about with each one. So yeah, this is all kind of under the scope of, or under the umbrella of what's called continuous integration, which is how you ensure that your tests are automatically run on every commit. And this kind of this makes sure that the pull request is validated really, and that your tests do continuously get run. So this kind of improves code quality. The overall aim is to uncover bugs at any point before they get spotted in the wild. GitHub Actions is the recommended CI service these days. Used to be Travis CI, but they've made some interesting decisions recently in how they bill their users. So yeah, I'd recommend these days just sticking with GitHub Actions because, again, it's all integrated and it works alongside everything else in GitHub. And yes, your CI can also run your linters, formatters, analysis, and all that other good stuff. Yep, so on to pull requests. We've kind of introduced them and we've discussed tools to help manage them, and here we are. So pull requests are the way that people make changes to your project, really, if you choose this workflow, of course. So contributors make changes, they'll open a pull request, and then hopefully your continuous integration will then run your tests, linters, formatters, and then at that point, assuming all your checks come back green, you have to actually then review the code yourself. And the code review process is dependent on what you're actually, what your project actually is. But you'll know yourself, and I'll mention briefly later on how some tips for doing that. And then you either accept that and the changes are merged, or you can feedback and request more changes, or you can close it and say go away. But that's not very nice. So yeah, similarly to issues, pull request supports templates. So this, you can actually, in fact, I think I have an example of what a template looks like for a pull request. But that helps make sure that everybody's filled out the right information when they request a change. Yeah, so yeah, code review. So be fair and balanced. Don't nitpick on minor issues because it's a waste of time, and your linters should help to, your formatters should help to remove that anyway. Oops. Yeah. Okay, so here's an example of a pull request template. So some of this text is expected to be deleted by the user and updated, and they check whether it's a bug fix example or a new feature. And yeah, this makes sure that they've added tests and documentation. Okay. Yeah, so here's some more screenshots of what pull requests look like. This one here shows that if there's certain keywords that you use in pull requests. So if you say fixes number 3, so it's issue number 3, GitHub automatically detects that when this pull request is merged, the issue will be closed. And this is probably quite a, the image on the right shows one of probably the more satisfying things. It's when you have a load of checks, you've approved it, and then at that point you can be fairly satisfied that the changes being made are valid and useful. There you go. You can also set it so that the merging doesn't actually, or is blocked unless all the checks come back green. But that's, again, something for you to decide on. Okay, so I think one of the last points in this section. So project boards. So yeah, it's very similar to if you've used Trello or Jira or Microsoft Planner. It's a Kanban board essentially. But you get again, you have all the benefits of integration with pull requests and issues. So you can actually have it set to automatically move cards around as pull requests or issues are opened and completed. And it's kind of, if you have an open source project that's public, well, yeah, I shouldn't have to say that obviously, but having a project board visible can kind of maybe encourage people to come along and see, oh, this needs worked on. I could maybe do that. So it could be useful for encouraging contributions. Yeah, and I think this is something to touch on. This is obviously something I'm probably not qualified to completely talk to you about, but it's probably worth saying a few words on actually how to interact with people on your project. Yeah, so Dave, I think these days the vast majority of GitHub features are free. There's a few things which are enterprisey, and it's more to do with managing user accounts and stuff. But I think there's a single page which sort of summarizes it if you search for GitHub features. And I think, yeah, I think I have a free account, and I've never had to, I've never even been asked to pay for anything. So as far as I'm aware, it's all free. Yeah, and there's lots of discounts for academics for some of the more fancy stuff. So yeah, interacting with people. So something which may be difficult to recall at this point, but just imagine that you're actually speaking to in person whoever you're typing at, because they're people too. They're not just bits of text on a screen. If you have a public project, all the comments are public, so keep that in mind. Treat bug reports as opportunities to improve rather than personal attacks, because they're not. They're usually people who are using your project who found something a bit wrong and they want to usually help you fix it. Yeah, so conversely, yeah, as soon as you say yes to adding a new feature, you then have to support that, often for a long time. Excuse me. So you're completely obligated to say no, basically. So it's up to your judgment. And yeah, finally, the thing to keep in mind is that everybody is, sorry, not everybody. A lot of people contributing to open source are, volunteers. Essentially, they're doing this in their own time. So it's something to keep in mind. Okay, I'll pause for any more questions in the chat. Yeah, Markar points out that you can have sort of sub teams and in a particular organization, so it's quite useful actually. I think this is one of the things, admittedly, that GitLab perhaps does better, but GitLab these days is focused kind of on enterprise customers, whereas GitHub is really just about developers. Not to get too Steve Ballmer on here, but yes, and Neon asks, have you used any tips on using GitHub Actions for building a CI pipeline? I do, yeah, and it is to reuse all the sort of templates and pre-built things as you can. So the fewer lines of YAML you have to write, because these things are defined as YAML text files. The fewer lines of YAML you have to write is great, and you can actually there's lots of pre-built templates that you can just include in your actions. So if you want to, for example, set up a cache of a particular thing, that's a few lines you can do rather than having to manage that yourself. And another example is if you want to ensure a particular language version is installed for your CI, that's another couple lines. You just reuse a template. It is one of these things that you can, it's kind of infinitely expandable, so you can create huge, massive pipelines for the test on every version of Python and Linux, but it's really not worth it. I think wikis are allowed for private repos. Let me just check. Sure, actually, I think wikis are allowed for public repos, for private repos. I'm sorry. if not, I mean, having your documentation in repository in the repository and files is probably just is fine. I'm not sure what their stance will be when they release the sort of full discussion forums for private repos, but I think their view is that these things should be public because it's public discourse, and open source is great and all that. Okay, so 5 minutes left. I just wanted to briefly mention some other features that are useful, or some other just random notes and bits of knowledge. So the wikis are actually behind the scenes. They're their own Git repo, so you can actually clone them down locally and edit them and then push them back. So if you want to make some more sort of sweeping changes to your wiki, then that's quite useful. I mentioned the GitHub desktop before, so that's essentially entire. So instead of working in the web interface, it's a particular application for your desktop, and you can manage your GitHub projects straight in it. Kind of close to that is GitHub, Git interfaces themselves. So it's managing Git from the command line can be a bit difficult sometimes because it's not always very visual. But there's plenty of tools that I'd recommend looking at least to manage Git repos in a bit more of a visual fashion. The other thing that's useful is GitHub has dependabots built in, which is it's basically a tool which will automatically let you know when there are new versions of any libraries that you use, and will actually open a pull request and upgrade them for you. So that's extremely useful if you rely on a lot of third-party libraries. So some other bits, there's a marketplace of apps and integrations, and you can hook up your GitHub repo to ping your Slack workspace when a pull request is opened, that sort of thing. You can pretty much do what you want because there's a public API you can use for GitHub. So you can pretty much do whatever you want. There's also, I think this is kind of new, but there are some automatic security tools. So they will sort of go through your repository and scan for any common bugs, or if you're using any libraries that are out of date and have vulnerabilities, you'll get notified of that. And there's a dark mode, which everything has to have these days, obviously. So there's that as well. Yes, you can link GitHub issues in Microsoft Teams, which is nice. I think Trello does it as well. You can link issues and it will display nicely. Display the card. Here's some examples of those features. So this is just an alert saying you have this old version of Log4j, and here's what you're possibly vulnerable to. Ignore the fact this has been open since January 2020. And here's an example of Dependabot where it says here's a new version, here's your pull request. There you go. And the other one I like is LGTM, which looks good to me, which lets you know if there's any it just kind of tells you, oh, this value may be null, or any other. It's another one of these linting tools that runs as part of your CI. Okay, so I'll quickly summarize. Didn't quite leave room for too many questions, but I'm around for the next 10 minutes or so. I'm happy to have a bit of a discussion. The summary is there's lots of, I put extra in quotes there because it's not really extra. It's stuff you have to do. Stuff you have to do anyway. So use GitHub workflows, automated tools. You can rely on that to kind of ease that process and make sure that your project is useful and that your team likes working with it. Key takeaways, a couple of them: just learn to write and use Markdown because it's super useful, and it's you can write really sort of rich documents from just plain text. Use issue and PR templates to vastly reduce the amount of manual effort you have to do when reviewing things, and use linters, formatters, and CI, of course, to help build quality control. I think that's everything. There's a few references there. Yep, that's me. I will see if there's any more questions, and thank you for listening.
So we have a question from Neon asking, have you any recommended GitHub pages that can be used as templates?
Yes, so the ones I recommend, for example, if you're if you're organizing a workshop or a sort of a few-day event, the software carpentry templates are excellent. So you can just you can just fork their template and then fill out the bits that you need, and that sort of builds a web page that contains sort of landing page and content in sort of different sections. I think I mentioned it previously. I'll try and scroll back, but there's Read the Docs and Sphinx are two tools that you could use to first of all write your documentation and then host it. That's sort of separate to GitHub pages. There we go. So there's Sphinx and Read the Docs, it's called. And yeah, I think those are the two main ones I've seen. I don't know, has anyone else got any suggestions? So I think I think Sphinx was originally from the Python community, and it actually uses, or it used to only use, restructured text rather than Markdown, which is a bit of a steeper learning curve. I believe these days you can actually just write Markdown, and that works. So yeah, your mileage may vary, but it's fairly straightforward. Sorry, Claire.
I was just going to say that we've actually changed from using Sphinx and Read the Docs for the ARCHER2 documentation. We're now using MKDocs. I can't remember the exact issue that led to us doing that, but that seems to be very stable and is also very good, and there's loads of information about using that online. So that's MKDocs.
Yeah, that's another great example, Claire. Thank you. Yeah, so it sounds like the user support guys have the right. I'm probably the people to listen to on this, so I'd maybe look at MKDocs. No problem. Thank you for being here, Neon. Yep, thanks for listening.